Hi, folks. Peggy on also. Well, welcome to our fourth session. Thank you all for hanging with us. Our fourth session, we're focusing on the role of AI in producing your produce. My name is Salah Issa. I'm a former AAAS fellow at the USDA National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and just recently accepted a faculty position at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign as an assistant professor in agriculture and biological engineering.
And hi, I'm also a co-chair for the AI and Ag session right now. I am Peggy Biga. I am a current AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the Office of the Chief Scientist. And I'm also an associate professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham in comparative biology.
We are delighted to have with us today Dr. Girish Chowdhary and Dr. Stephen Mirsky. Dr. Chowdhary is an associate professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he develops AI-guided autonomous robots for agriculture. Dr. Mirsky is a research ecologist at the USDA Agriculture Research Services, where he studies implementation of precision agriculture on farms. We're going to start with playing some introductory remarks. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm going to talk about AI for robotics. And thank you, Salah, for introducing me. So my group works on a lot of things, but particularly in the last few years, we're working on robotics for agriculture. And we really believe that robotics and AI will make farming more sustainable and more profitable. So let me tell you this story in three ways. First, I'll talk a little bit about robotics in high throughput phenotyping, which is really at the base of all of farming, kind of how we create new products. Then I'll talk about robotics for improving sustainability of agricultural systems. And finally, I'll talk about some things on the horizon that could really help with increasing diversity of cropping systems all around the US and specifically in the Midwest. So crop breeding is kind of at the foundation of all agriculture. For example, corn that we kind of take for granted was never not a natural crop. The South Americans 9,000 years ago started breeding from a plant that looked nothing like corn, which is shown here, teosinte. And over about 3,000 years of breeding, we finally had modern varieties of corn. We really need to accelerate, though, that process of breeding so that we can feed a growing population. For example, in Africa, the population is going to double, but the yields are 3 times less. So how do we do that? So one way to do that is to accelerate breeding by helping breeders solve this GWAS problem, the genome-wide association problem. So if you can find, so all the genes are sequenced. If we can associate genes to phenotypes, which is how they exhibit themselves, then we can accelerate breeding. To do this, these major breeding corporations and, of course, academic breeders run massive field trials. So this is an example of a 40-acre sorghum trial. And in here, you can see 3 by 3 meter plots of different varieties of sorghum planted together. And the breeders are looking to see which ones are going to do better in this environment. But the big bottleneck here is a lot of these measurements are done manually, and they take too much time, and they're not as good as they could be. So what we've been working on here is a robotic system that could go under the plant canopy, collect data for the breeders, and make sense of that data, as in convert that data into numbers. So this is our robot TerraSentia. It has 3 cameras and 2 LiDAR sensors. It can go autonomously using the LiDAR without having to use GPS. So there's a lot of very interesting AI challenges as you go under the plant canopy to get the robots to work. Then we use advanced machine vision algorithms using machine learning to identify traits. Like in this case, we're finding just the corn stem width. Here we're finding the corn ear height, and then we're doing 3D reconstruction of the corn. So this is really a kind of a beginning of a new form of robotics for agriculture. And what we are hoping over time is that they can provide farmers an alternative to the very large tractor systems that we're used to. Now, the farming in the Midwest is really scales only up, and that happens because of the large tractors. The large-scale farming and large-scale tractors are kind of coexist. So, but this type of a system has a lot of issues. For example, herbicide resistance is one of those issues, which has kind of come about due to a lot of chemical spraying and resistant varieties. And this is just one of those issues. There's other things such as phytoplankton blooms, soil compaction that are caused by large-scale agriculture. So just a herbicide resistance, for example, could cost us billions of dollars in profit. Now, if you go to small farms, places like India or Africa, you see slightly a different picture. So there, I think a lot of money is actually being used for supporting labor, but the labor isn't really being paid fairly, and they're dealing with herbicide resistance, but in totally different ways. So we think that systems of small robots that work together could really provide a new way to farm in a more sustainable way. For example, well, we already saw the under canopy phenotyping. They could do herbicide-free mechanical weeding, which would reduce chemical use by 50 to 100%. They could also do nitrogen spot dressing, 30% reduction, and things like cover crops, which are currently not feasible because you can't really get large tractors into the fields later in the year, could become possible. But obviously here, the AI kind of leaves the robot realm and goes into the coordination realm. How do you get a team of robots to work together so that they could do what is needed where it's needed? So kind of like think at the field level, but act at the plant level. And then when you go from here, so this is all in commodity Midwest kind of corn, soybean, row crops, but really there's huge challenges in labor in the specialty crops, right? And that's kind of caused very little diversity, for example, in the Midwest, because we are not able to find the labor. And then California, of course, fruit keeps rotting on the fields because even there, they're not able to find labor. So if you look at where current robots are, so if you look at this graph where we have dexterity and scale, right? So tractors are here. They're large scale, but they're not very dexterous. People are here. They're small scale, but they're highly dexterous. And our robots, unfortunately, are here. And not just ours, but many of the robots that we see today. They overall are not high scale, and they're not dexterous. And you can go make them high scale by using the form factor, but how do you increase the dexterity? So for this, this is an example of some of the work we're doing where we're designing new types of arms that use flexible as well as rigid manipulators. And the arm's actually designed by a professor, Girish at the UIUC. But really, a big challenge here is how do you do the AI that actually controls these more continuum type arms, which are more similar to octopuses and elephant trunks. So working on AI here is going to be one of the major issues. And if we can do that, we can provide more alternatives to specialty farmers. So the other part of all of this story is how do you actually get to the end goal of, robots that help farmers? And a lot of the times what happens is that, we try to focus on what we call level 5 autonomy, right? People try to go after that. But the reality of the technology is that we are probably here, where basically your eyes off, but but the technology costs too much. So the real goal of our work and overall the work in AI over the next few years should be to bring the levels of autonomy up while keeping the human in mind. So, simplify the human's user experience while at the same time bringing the cost down so that the human always stays in the middle, focused on, getting the most out of their crop, and the cost still keeps coming down, so it becomes practical. So that's basically what I had to say.
And now we'll hear from Dr. Mirsky.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share the work that I'm doing using AI and machine learning applications in sustainable agriculture. Farming is really knowledge intensive. Therefore, we need to understand how climate, soil, and management interact to drive function. And we can do this by reimagining the farm landscape as a living laboratory and bringing our science onto farms. However, when we bring our science on farms, it does require protocols that are sufficiently light and tight due to the limited infrastructure and the increased costs. IoT systems are perfect for on-farm research. We can take low-cost technologies, apply them across the landscape, and collect massive amounts of information. Here you see us using low-cost sensors, satellites and drones, smart machinery, all of this put together and aggregating that information and analyzing that allows us to do things like high throughput phenotyping, develop plant models, improve the efficiency of our management around water, nitrogen, and pests, as well as provide adaptive decision support. Here are just some of the examples of the IoT systems that we use in our farming systems research. Here you can see we're using water sensors to continuously monitor soil and moisture temperatures over time. We have LiDAR and multispectral sensors mounted to equipment on this highboy tractor that allows us to quantify the spatial distribution of plant quality and quantity. And we also are using phytocams, and here we call them stress cams, and I'm going to introduce those in greater detail in a second. This is just kind of a little bit of a framework of how we think about applying machine learning in sustainable agriculture, right? So here you can see on the left is we're focused a lot on cover crops. They're an important sustainable ag strategy. These are the types of criteria we'd be targeting. Here's our cash crops and the kinds of metrics we're targeting there. And these are the kinds of environmental conditions that our farming systems face, right? So that these are data collected in a number of different ways, or including images, which allows us to apply their computer vision, coupled with machine learning. We could also be developing process-based models and empirical statistics, and a lot of this can be then hybridized with machine learning as well, as you can see here, and all feeding into providing decision support tools to growers. And so this is a big part of the way we organize ourselves and our thinking around AI applications in ag. Here's those stress cams that I was telling you about. So here we can train phytocams, just simple, inexpensive cameras, and train them to know when a crop is undergoing stress. So you can see here, these soybean plants are wilting, or these corn plants are starting to curl up. We can train these cameras to detect when that occurs, and then it sends off a timestamp that triggers when that stress begins and when that stress ends. And that can allow us to integrate across the landscape and determine when crops are undergoing water stress. And this can be used for research. It can be used to inform irrigation technologies. It can also be used to accelerate our breeding programs. Weed management is also a big opportunity with machine vision and learning applications. Here you can see we can sense the landscape in developing mapping and management systems. We're also developing tools for researchers. So here we are developing these handheld devices that research can go in there and quantify their biomass and their plant densities of weeds. And so automating the process of collecting data, which dramatically reduces the cost and also increases the precision. But moreover, it allows us to capture information about pests that vary spatially a lot, right? You have areas where there's high weed density and low weed density. How do you capture that information? Well, machine learning and vision are a big way to do that. Here's just another visual of what that can look like to give you a greater sense of how we might apply these technologies. Here we're also using machine learning in hybrid approach with models. So here we're taking an empirical model and integrating it with machine learning, and it's improving our precision and our ability to estimate cover crop performance in the landscape. Now, in all of this work, we have to create standards. We have distributed networks of scientists, and so to do that, we're really trying to avoid using paper. We use web-based tablets, and we develop applications to standardize our farm management history data collection, as well as our protocols across a distributed network of scientists. And here's just an example of that. Here's an application that our team can use so that we can standardize that data collection. You'd be surprised on simple measures, just like taking a plant biomass sample in the field. That can be done many different ways, and have a lot of variables to consider across the country, depending on the management system. So to create those standards and have data that's machine readable, that's coordinated across a network, these applications are big for that. Now, in all of this work, we require a lot of data to train our models for machine learning. You need a lot of images. And so that's what works great across large distributed networks of scientists. However, our distributed network of scientists might have a wide range of technological skill levels. Some might be very advanced and are flying drones, and some don't have those kinds of technical skill sets. So we developed low-cost solutions as well to be able to collect the massive amount of images we need. So here you can see we have signed a QR code to this frame. So folks can take this frame and go out there and take a digital image with this camera right here, and it automates assigning an identifier to that image as it goes into our databases to allow for continuous machine learning of those images as they come in. So this is just a visual of the kinds of networks that we're working with here. We have distributed networks of farms and research hubs. You can see these are all research stations like USDA or S or land-grant universities. And we coordinate across these networks. And this is what some of those metrics that I was describing look like. Here's our continuous water sensor monitoring systems and these weed image systems. When we put this all together, we create what we're calling an information ecology for precision sustainable agriculture. We've got, past, historical data, new data, current research going on that feeds into our databases that allows us to kind of coordinate and standardize that data. That data is being used to build decision support tools or to refine existing tools. And our growers are then using those tools while we're continuously monitoring what's going on farm. And that data feeds back into the database and creates the kind of positive feedback loops necessary to feed the world in a more sustainable and precise way.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome our panelists to turn on the screen and unmute themselves. Well, thank you very much for a very informative talks. I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of people don't realize like how AI is going to change agriculture. And I'll start away with this question, looking at these technologies. Girish, how far away do you think we are in seeing these technologies on our farms?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And I think basically the short answer is, some of these technologies are already being fielded, right? And in the next few years, we should start seeing a lot more of this coming out. For example, the phenotyping robots that I was showing, they are being commercialized by a company called EarthSense that I co-founded, and it's also incubated at the University of Illinois. So those technologies are already out there. Steve showed a number of other technologies like apps and data set systems that are probably already out there also. We think that it'll be about, by next year or so, at least from our side, we're hoping to start pilots in weed management and cover crops and some of this with Steve. So I think, 2 to 3 years, we should start to see, right now, the users of the technologies are researchers, which include commercial breeders, like large companies, KWS, Corteva, Syngenta, Bayer. But over time, the users of the technology will become the farmers. And we see that I think the early adopters are already starting to approach us and they want to try this out. But within 2 to 3 years, I think more farmers could have access to this technology.
Well, Stephen, on your side, on the technologies that you've showed, how can we accelerate the development of these solutions?
Well, one, I think that the way we look at these technologies is that they themselves are accelerating solutions for farmers. So the technology in itself, right? If you're applying, like Girish and I both have been talking about breeding, right? If you're developing solutions for breeding where researchers are not standing and having to score every single plot and walk down those lines and those rows and have to actually put their eyes on every plant, and you've removed some of that subjectiveness and you've got automated low-cost technologies that are continuously monitoring, they can pick up things that the human eye can't pick up. So just for like the concerns around drought stress, right? Water is going to become an increasing issue in agriculture, no question. And it already has. And so how do we accelerate germplasm that is going to deal with these conditions? Well, AI applications, sensing platforms, these are the kinds of things that will greatly accelerate the advancement of solutions for agriculture. The technology itself, I think that a big part of what accelerates the technology transfer pathway is public-private partnerships, right? You want to leverage those relationships. There's a lot that the public sector has to offer in the R&D and the developing of AI solutions in agriculture, and the private sector are a big part of really accelerating that technology transfer. So strong partnerships between public and private are really critical for delivering those kinds of solutions.
Yeah, no, thank you. We are now, we're getting questions from our audience. So Peggy, you want to ask?
Yeah, thank both of you for two great talks. This is a great question from someone in the audience. Analogous to how machine learning algorithms have been seen to have tendency to continue or exacerbate historical issues of bias and applications to humans. We've heard a lot about this today in this symposia in both the employment and criminal justice discussions we had earlier. So redirecting kind of that idea to you two, are you concerned that applying machine learning to agriculture could continue to exacerbate environmental or sustainability issues? And what do you think needs to be in place to ensure that larger global environmental factors are incorporated into the goals and decision making within these algorithms?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I can take a shot at it. So I think the overall idea here is to help make AI for good, use machine learning to kind of address some of the critical bottlenecks that's made our agriculture unsustainable, right? So I think we both talked about the rise of herbicide resistance, right? And I mean, I'm not a weed ecologist, but if you look through the literature, you'll find that a lot of that is linked to overuse of chemicals in farms. So, and why do we do that? Because you couldn't physically go out there in the 2,500 acres that Midwest farmer controls and pick out every weed by hand. So we spray chemicals. And I think, this is a place where machine learning can help. And we're already seeing that with something like Blue River, right? Technology that can see and spray as opposed to just spraying everywhere. You take that forward, you can imagine robots that go through the fields and don't use any chemicals at all and just pick out the weeds where they're needed. So I think that there's a huge potential in machine learning in agriculture really to be a force for good, right? It's just attention is the biggest thing that's missing in agriculture. We try to go large scale because that's the only way we can make money in agriculture, right? If you go to places like India and Africa, small farmers are struggling. And in here, they were struggling too, 60, 50, 70 years ago. So we're trying to replace that attention by chemicals and simple spray and pray solutions. So we think, it's the machine learning really going to take us the other way, into the way that we should have been when we were doing, giving the agriculture the attention it needs.
I would just build on that response and just say that, what AI is offering us is an opportunity to rethink agriculture in many ways of how we actually approach farming and what we can do. A lot of the kinds of things that were unimaginable from a management perspective are all of a sudden becoming imaginable, right? And so now the creative process of, what can we do? What do we need becomes a reframed question for farmers, because the solutions around, for example, marginal land, right? We have a lot of land that is low productivity land that stays wet in our fields, right? This is a good example, right? We have a lot of fields and farm fields that we have wet spots in the field. And when you have really large scale equipment, you have a limited number of options of what you can do to deal with these really marginal parts of the field. And so how can we rethink the way we manage our production systems so that the technology we have allows us to avoid investing resources into land that is going to not be a good return on investment, but that we're locked into because of our existing infrastructure and the scale and the size of what we operate. And that can translate into a lot of different aspects in the ag sector. So there's a lot of opportunities to really rethink questions that we thought were solved and are rigid and don't have the options to flex. Now we can introduce a lot of flexibility because we have smart technology out there.
Peggy, you're on mute.
Sorry, a lot going on over here. Thank you both. There's another question that has come in directed at both of the panelists. Can you both give kind of your idea of what you think an order of magnitude estimate for how much AI, machine learning, and robotics could improve agricultural productivity? And could you discuss the relative potential impact of the different AI and robotics applications that you discussed?
Yeah. I can start with that. So okay, so let's take weeding herbicide resistance is a very critical issue. So we see robots and AI helping basically address the herbicide resistance crisis in fields that have that, and overall reduce chemical usage from 50% to 100%. So that's one critical issue. The second critical issue is nitrogen, like and I'm kind of focusing everything on the Midwest, corn and soybean, because these are the largest acreage and the lowest profit. So a lot of like really tight, a lot of pressure on the farmer to perform. So second is nitrogen use. So with AI that includes satellite imagery, and drone imagery and airplane imagery, along with under canopy application, we could potentially reduce nitrogen usage by 30%, right? So these are just some examples. Other examples include enabling more diversification of cropping systems. So helping Illinois farmers, as an example, grow more specialty crops, right? More vegetables and fruit.
I guess to add to that, the questions about magnitude of on productivity, and I think that in agriculture we have these two big critical we have several challenges, but this big one that you hear about all the time in USDA, this grand challenge of feeding the world, right? That's often mentioned, that we're going to be dramatically increasing our population by 2050, and we need to increase food production to meet that demand. So certainly increasing food production is an ongoing goal and necessity in agricultural systems. But it's not just the production numbers that we're targeting, right? It's the consistency and the resiliency of our production systems, right? So we not just targeting high yield potential, but having that consistent high yielding potential. And what a lot of AI offers us is that ability to add more resiliency into the system, right? It allows us to embed practices that are more site-specific in their management. And so it makes better use of resources. So it allows us to get greater productivity from lesser resources, but it also allows us to be targeting problematic areas like what Girish was mentioning, when we have a problem where we might have a pest outbreak, or we have a part of the field that's developed a resistant biotype to weeds. We want to be able to target that issue and do that rapidly, so we can have that rapid response. And what a lot of these sensing platforms allow us to do is detect the landscape, use plants as sensors, right? So now plants are our diagnostic tools, and we can have this rapid response. And so that's a big part of this.
Yeah, and just respond to that also. And there's a comment on the chat about food distribution. Yeah, so I think basically that's kind of what we're saying. It's not that we just have to ramp up the food production to feed the world, right? I mean, in some ways we do produce enough food. I mean, it's maybe not produced in the right spots and not moved to the right places, and not produced, in as sustainably as it could have been. So.
And to elaborate on these questions, similar in this symposium, we've had multiple panelists speak on how AI is impacting, in a sense, criminal justice, employment, and so on. So what are your thoughts on how AI is going to be impacting agriculture? Are we going to be replacing farmers? Is a trend of bigger farms going to continue? Or what do you think, what new opportunities does AI give in terms of the employment aspect of farms or farm workers and so on?
Yeah, so I guess the hope is that AI augments the farmer, right? I think that the reality of the technology is that we're far away from fully automating the farm, and it's not clear whether it can be or needs to be automated, right? What is necessary is to enable the farmer to be more sustainable and still make more money at all scales. Right now, farming is a difficult profession. And because you have to be large scale, you have to manage this crazy large area. But if we can, with robots and other things, we can augment small farmers to produce more food, and the food that community needs, then we can diversify more of the systems and create more jobs and actually bring more money to the farmers. So I don't think that the goal here is to replace the farmers. I mean, there's already not a lot of people working in farming. So there's a huge labor crunch in certain areas. So really, it's about augmenting the labor that's already there.
Could you elaborate, Stephen, on your thoughts on how AI in farms will change the lives of the farmers?
Yeah, I mean, AI is changing all of our lives, right? I mean, AI is everywhere. Our cell phones are a perfect example of how our lives have been changed by AI technology, and farmers are part of that, that social experiment, if you will, of all these different technologies that exist. So they're already using a lot of these in their day-to-day lives through different cell phone technologies and applications. It's ubiquitous. And so some of it is certainly at the very simplistic forms, it increases knowledge, right? Just having more information about your system and understanding of what's going on out there. Farming is incredibly complex, and it varies spatially across the landscape, right? So when we think about a farmer that might have to be dealing with differences between their neighbor, I mean, farmers are mostly interested in a given field, right? They know that one field behaves differently than another field. So when you're making recommendations to them, they're interested in what you're having to say and they're listening, but what comes to their mind is how does that affect this field? Because it's not just one field that they're managing that is this constant across their whole farm operation. They're constantly having to vary their management based on these fields. So AI applications using different types of sensing technologies, it allows us to transform the scale in which we manage our systems. It allows us to have site specificity that just transforms the efficiencies that we see in the landscape. So farmers are going to certainly see some labor shifts, right? We already seen that, automated tractors, so they can line up on the edge of a field and then it's going to drive across the field. That gives them more time to be exploring applications on their phone, to be learning more about their systems and whatever they're doing during that time. That's in giving them more time to understand their systems better because of that automation. But there's also going to be higher precision in practice, site-specific solutions that are going to increase efficiencies and are going to allow them to address challenges that they used to just have to accept that this was something that they couldn't do anything about in their system. So I think it's going to give a lot of opportunity, not just time savings.
Great, thanks guys. So we kind of switching gears and going back to the actual data that's collected a little bit. There's a question about whether the data that's collected automatically from farms can help make adjustments further down the food supply chain beyond the farm.
Do you want to take it, Steve?
Sure. So that I'm assuming that the question is getting at that we are aggregating a lot of data on farms and and how else can we apply that data, right? Is that I think the question there. I participate in a lot of on-farm research, and so we are studying what is going on for a given farmer and their practice and how that's influencing their system. But the thing about agriculture is that it's really hard to give prescriptions, right? This concept that we're just going to give a prescription to all farmers of one size fits all model is really difficult to do. And so by aggregating lots of data across climate and soil and management, we can develop better insights about our production systems. We can understand where the choke points are. We can understand what practices are going to do best in a given region, whether we're targeting a practice that is focusing on productivity, whether it's targeting sustainability and environmental stewardship concerns. Any one of these kinds of objectives in our production systems are linked to climate and soil and management dynamics. And so when we can aggregate that, we can have better insights about how things work and where. So for example, we have cost share programs. We have federal government programs that are subsidizing best management practices or conservation practices. And so they are always looking to better target those resources, right? When they're providing some kind of crop insurance or a cost share or some kind of way to support the grower in a given practice, having better targeted information about what works where and how to encourage a given practice in a certain region is the kinds of things you can do when you aggregate a lot of this information. And I'm going to kind of stay within the farm gate with my answer. I'll let Girish go beyond the farm gate.
I think it's food waste happens at the field, during transport, and in the supermarket and at consumers. So I think at the field can certainly be helped with these technologies. I think I have to think about how it would help down the chain. That's a very good question and a great research topic. There's a question on price, though. If you want me to answer that, I can answer, because I don't see we have a lot of time here.
We have about 5 more minutes, so a couple more questions. Yeah, that question about kind of taking data off the farm and past the farm or past the gate, as Stephen put it, really has a lot of potential for better informing us about food loss and waste across the whole food systems, right? But yeah, that actually, I think you brought up cost, Girish, and the next question that I have on my list from the audience is, what do you see as the biggest impediment to adoption of these technologies? And maybe you could talk about that, like at the farm level, but also across the food system level.
Absolutely. I think there are 2 main concerns always. One is the cost. Agriculture is cost constrained. We know that weeding costs about $50 an acre right now in large scale corn soybean acreage. So, we need to get close to that if we want to have robotic weeders everywhere in the Midwest. There is, of course, different points of entry for people who are struggling with herbicide resistance. So the AI holds a lot of power in bringing the cost down. So I showed in my talk this graph of increasing levels of autonomy, but along with that, there is a decreasing cost curve that we need to get, right? So we need to go from about $5,000 per acre, which is kind of where the technologies are, to $50 an acre. So 2-3 orders of magnitude changes need to happen as we bring that down. And how will that happen? So one example is we replace expensive sensors with cheap sensors by using AI to augment the cheap sensors. So I think AI will really help bring the costs down of the technology, and then hopefully to a point where it'll take the adoption curves typically. There's the early adopters, and then most people get the message, and then finally there are the stragglers, right? And typically the early adopters are the ones who are in the most pain. This is a prosumer; these are not consumers, right? Farmers are prosumers, so they're looking. So people who have herbicide resistance, for example, might adopt earlier. Then the other question for adoption is the stickiness of the adoption. Like once, say you get the right price and I buy the technology, will I continue to use it? I tried it out once. Will I continue to use it? And I think one big concern there is, how quickly will the technology change? How easy will it be for me to use? And how much do I have to retrain myself, right, in order to be able to use this technology? And I think some of that comes on the industry that makes the technology, but the other part also comes on regulations and overall the society to kind of retrain and encourage people to adopt new technologies.
Well, thanks, Girish. I am so actually just going, now that we have just one question left, basically 3 minutes, let me ask a question for both of you. We've seen this pandemic. It has an impact on all really industries, including agriculture. We've seen slaughterhouses that had to shut down due to the pandemic. We've seen farms are reporting that all their farm workers are infected with COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So just a question for both of you. Had we been able to implement these technologies, or maybe for future pandemics, if we had these future technologies, how will that impact? Like, how would we be able to do things differently than what's going on right now?
Yeah. So 2 things. I mean, people who are looking at robotics for answers. And there's an ICRA going on right now, which is the International Conference on Robotics, so one of the major events in our community. And, really, we are not there yet, right? Robotics is not there yet. We should have been able to we should have invested in these technologies earlier enough so that we could have handled social distancing in these really critical places where food is grown and you cannot not work there. That's one thing I feel that we could do better next time around. And the second thing is the systems are stuck. So and this is, I really don't have a lot of data to support this, but just from what we can see at talking to farmers is that even if farmers wanted to say, okay, I want to switch to growing berries now or potatoes now because that's what my my community needs, and not so much the ethanol for which I'm growing the corn, it's not an easy switch for the farmers because they are tied into this very large ecosystem of large farms and large equipment. They're still going to grow corn. So this resilience to economic pressure is not there. And if we had more tools in the hands of farmers, they could potentially do that. I want to give Stephen a chance here.
Yeah.
I think Girish handled that well. This is a very complicated question, and not one that I think that I'm going to give a very good answer on. The reality of it is as Girish said, farmers are already knowing what they're going to do before they do it, right? It's not like they just decide in April they're going to plant corn, right? They're ordering their seed way in advance. They're ordering all of their inputs well in advance. They have all of their economics budgeted. They're watching markets. They're doing, they are the ultimate, multivariate analysis machines, right? They're doing that all the time and weighing all these variables. So to think that, they're going to just dramatically make any kind of a shift because of something that comes on in a 1 month period that we, is hard to see that would happen. And maybe that will be there. I think that what AI, and I imagine that there's already a lot of AI applications that are involved in our national, COVID response, right? There's all sorts of things happening in the health sector that I suspect that there's applications being developed there. In the ag space, I think what Girish is getting at, and I would just generally agree with that, is that diversified systems do afford a little bit of resiliency in some cases. And so having, more AI and robotic systems that does appear to be kind of part of the solution to creating more scalable systems, more diversified cropping systems. There's plenty of evidence in the literature of some of the value that provides us from a production perspective. And certainly in this case, that could be advantageous from a marketing perspective. If markets shift per commodity because of a virus, having these diversified systems may lead to some resiliency there. But again, I think I'm just scratching at this.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you very much, Girish. Thank you, Peggy, for moderating the questions from our audience. I guess we're going to close this panel for now.